Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 253rd weekly edition of the Frank and Stan Chat. And for those of you who are watching on video, you'll see that we have two guests back with us who were guests in March 2025. So it's great to be able to say to Alan Braven and to Anthony Benedict, welcome back.
Welcome back, lads.
Thank you for having us.
No, yeah, well, we actually thought, didn't we, when we set this up, that it would align with the publication of a book. But I don't know if that has actually happened. Well, I know it hasn't yet, but it might have morphed into two books. I don't know who's going to give us a bit of an update as to where we are with that.
So I'll start, and then Alan will probably jump in. That's our usual pattern. So first of all, it's pretty much a year to the day of our first book's publication. So that's the first thing, and that's what we talked about last time, which we're delighted about.
Ah, I see. So there's not two extra books here, Alan. This is a
No,
follow-up
and two extra books as well. So we've been very busy. We haven't got enough to do at the moment. So our first book is a year old, and we're delighted in that it's still selling. I've been up and down in the country. Well, both of us been up and down the country presenting and talking about the book, and we've done a lot of work on lining it up with the white paper because fortuitously, it's almost like we wrote the book preempting what the white paper would say. So that's really good. And then on the back of that, we've got two more books due out, probably round about the summer. So the first one Alan will talk about, and then I'll come back and talk about the second one very quickly.
Okay, over to you then, Alan.
Okay, so the first one is really follows on from educating everyone and about the neuroscience and about how the brain works, but it's about leadership of schools. Now there are tons of books out there telling you how to do the school leadership, so it's nothing like that at all. It's about and I think Stan, you were just alluding to something before, the emotional aspects of school leadership and the toll that it takes on individuals and the difficulty of doing it. So it's from the perspective of the head teacher as opposed to any leader, but it also talks about dealing with staff and some of the difficult situations that you end up in that nobody really prepares you for. I don't think, anyway.
No, I agree. I agree with that. It's funny how these national professional qualifications are very good on strategy and what have you, but actually one of the biggest problems you'll have is dealing with a particularly tricky member of staff, and that might just be the relationship you have with them, and what's gone before if you're new and all this sort of stuff. But
yeah, well, I like everybody else, I did the NPQH and thought, that's it, I know how to do it, I've read the book, I can do this job. And then day one it was like, oh my god.
I used to say we used to introduce new heads to a mentoring system when I worked in Lancashire, and I used to say to the new heads, there's a secret across teaching that nobody ever shares, and I'm going to share it with you now. Sometimes it hurts, and sometimes it hurts really bad because it's personal. But what nobody does is tell anybody else that it hurts or that they're hurt. They keep it to themselves. So I want you to be the first generation that puts the hand up and say, I need some help.
And it's funny you should say that, Stan, because the original working title of the book was called School Leadership Hurts Sometimes.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, he's going to look at his books now again.
Oh, I'm just going to wonder if you've seen this one. It's an American one.
The Wounded Leader.
No, I've not seen that one, no.
That's along the same lines.
Right.
The bit I like about it is it sort of says that why is leadership different from a job in Tesco, let's say, stacking shelves? Well, if somebody says those shelves are really done badly, it's not a personal attack, whereas everything to do with school leadership, parents, other members of staff, etc., it's highly personal.
It is. So this one is called Surviving and Thriving in School Leadership.
Right. And that's due out when, Alan?
Well, the manuscript went off last week, so I don't know, from the summer onwards again.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll get you in. Anthony, and the second book?
So the second book, when I fell down my trauma and attachment rabbit hole, I started writing a weekly blog for the staff, really, and it started off just kind of with key quotes and key bits of reading that I'd found, because I thought you don't get enough stuff as a teacher that's just a quick
Yeah.
bit, digestible stuff. And then somehow I slipped into basically telling a story about my children or my family and how I'd got it wrong that week. And the staff started stopping me and saying, "Do you know, because you'd said that, I've dealt with this child differently this morning." So I wrote that, and it was also a bit of a challenge with Alan, because I said I'm going to do it weekly, and Alan says you'll never manage to keep that up. So I have managed to keep it up for a year. So it's left me with 52 1,000 word blogs, if you like.
Oh,
We've
wow.
now found a small publisher called Teacher Writers, and they're turning that into a book. So it's slightly different to the blogs, but yeah, in essence, it's called Seeing Children Differently, and it's about how I've got it wrong on a weekly
But
basis.
have you
What I've
passed
learned
it?
from it.
Have you passed this with your children, who are no doubt
Well,
the
they're quite
origins of
delighted.
this failure?
The children are delighted. There's a picture of them in the first book, so they like the fact that they're going to be in the book. And my
Oh, right.
daughter told this lovely story at bedtime. She wanted to do a science research, and the question she asked was, if you take a shell, because you know how you can hear the sea in shells, don't you? So she said, she said, how long, if you keep the shell away from the sea, how long will you still be able to hear the sea for? And I just thought that's just golden, isn't it? So she was delighted that that's made it into the book.
Uh,
I'm not sure what my wife will make of it, but you've got to suffer for your art, don't you?
yeah.
We need to know what your answer to that was, actually, to make it make sense.
You got to read the book.
Yeah, you have to read the book for that one.
Yeah. Okay, right. Well, this is a weekly chat. Thanks for the introduction, gents. It is great to have you back. So, right, let's kick off. Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, it links to a lot, obviously, to what Alan was just saying. Because I've just done a presentation for heads on Martin's Law and the implications for schools, and in my view, the need to do it now, not wait until 2027 when it comes into force. I was in that presentation, I was explaining that it does ask, that the Act does ask that the school names a responsible person. I think that's very harsh, being as what the possible implications are if things go wrong in how you are organising your school to protect the premises from an attack. And legally and in the guidance itself, it suggests for schools they might want to make the governing body the responsible person. And it struck me then, a really sensible move, a legal move, because they're the right people to do it. But I wonder how many governing bodies actually consider themselves in that role. I'm not sure they do. I think they think, the strategic view of the school and that kind of stuff. But do they think they hold responsibility as well as accountability? Because I think what happens in most cases is that becomes the head teacher's job. And what I'm trying to do, I think, as a result of a bit of reading and a bit of presentation, is to say to governing bodies, take this one yourself and use it to build an architecture for the school structure that should be there anyway, but start to say, well, what are we accountable for? And how do we go about making sure those things are happening? I'm trying in a way to protect a head teacher that I don't know, that might never happen, from having to be the one person responsible for something if something goes wrong. Now, I know heads would say, well, we carry that for health and safety and things. Yes, I understand that. But again, health and safety responsibility lies with the governing body. It doesn't lie with the head teacher. I know you talk about delegation and everything, but I just think it's time that the governing body, as a group, started to take some of that weight off head teachers.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of heads that would agree with that. Certainly CEOs would as well. I mean, it's just it's like it feels like it's a shared responsibility anyway. But as you say, a lot of some governing bodies, some trust board, they don't actually quite connect with it. They feel as though they can delegate their bit of it to somebody else.
And what happens in reality when something goes wrong?
Well,
if there's a health and safety issue, the head teacher's the only one that
yeah,
gets approached,
yeah.
And I think systems should be in place that say, well, if something's gone wrong, let's have a look who's accountable. The governing body are accountable. So we charge the governing body with what have you done to prevent this in the past. And it might be, well, we asked the head teacher to do this, this, and this. Did you check that it was done? And all those questions come to the governing body rather than to an individual member of the body or the head teacher in most cases.
Can I just ask a question on that?
please.
Our trust governing body has been brilliant, and I've worked with a variety of governing bodies, from brilliant ones to kind of fairly ineffective ones. But I think there's a bigger question in that it's a voluntary role.
Yeah.
And actually, if you're going to do it well, it takes up a lot of time, and actually it can be very, very stressful. So I just wonder if the whole sort of structure and how that works need looking at again, because if you do it right, there's a lot of responsibility on a governing body, and that's a lot on people like yourselves,
Yeah.
But
what everyone's got to understand, it's a corporate responsibility. It's not individual governors. Individual governors are not responsible for all those things. The corporate body of the governing body are. And again, I'm not sure that's shared, because what happens is, well, we need a rep for health and safety. Right, that's your job, governor, and again, that becomes an individual's care and responsibility and accountability. And I don't know the answer to it, Anthony, but I think it's something governing bodies should be asking of themselves. Are we doing enough to take some weight off the head teacher? And are we creating an architecture of governance that means we can be accountable, and by being accountable, it means that we do challenge properly and we do make sure things are done. Because I'm not convinced, having been on a few governing bodies, that challenge part really happens. I think it's more a schedule. We've not asked about fire drills. All right, let's say, how many fire drills have you done this time? And when there's conversations also where, I can give an example where a school, a member of staff made toast at lunchtime, and they managed to set the fire drill off at lunchtime with all the children in the dining hall. So you can imagine the chaos. What turned out was, none of the dinner time staff had been told what to do. So, that was the outcomes. Right, what have we got wrong there? And it boiled down to, well, we didn't want, it's a lot of money to have them all in for half a day to give them training. And it's just, no, we need to rethink, and we need to remodel. And when it comes to things like Martin Law's asking for, in evacuation, getting children into school quickly and sensibly off the playground or into a safe place, have schools practice that. A fabulous school, when I was doing the talk, the head said, yeah, we've had our fire alarm altered, so there are different tones. So one tone is to get into school and get into the place you've been shown, and the other one is obviously an evacuation. And every Friday morning they play both tones, so the children recognise which is which and what they're supposed to do. They don't do it every but I think that's a really easy way of saying, with two sounding signals, and all the children and all the staff know what they mean. Others have said we've had hooters and things, but you can just see the failure there, can't you?
Yeah.
Where's the hooter?
Yeah.
Hey,
who had it last?
Yeah. Just so we can move on to Alan.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's all right. I was this week. I met with the trust board that have merged. I was a trustee, and we merged with Dixon's with a group of schools. And just to echo what Stan was saying, I mean, just that merger, the trust board, the amount of hours that we put into that work, was significant to get it right, to try and get it right. So I do understand that thing about it's unpaid, but actually you shouldn't underestimate how much work goes into all of this. But the second thing was, I'd never heard of this before, was that we have a barrister who's on the board. And he said, well, professional insurance have you taken out for us as a trust board when we merge with the new trust, that we're not then liable as a board to any sort of errors that we'd made or misunderstandings that we'd made? And so it sort of made me think, well, I don't ever remember taking out this sort of professional insurance for trust boards. And it only came to a head when we were closing that trust down. That's when, because I think he thought, well, if the problem arose, we could deal with it. But here we were open to perhaps a challenge from the new board saying you were unfair, you did this sort of stuff. So just thinking about that work that you're suggesting, Stan, it might suggest that actually there does need to be more professional indemnity for boards if they're going to move into that area. Anyway, let's move on to Alan.
They're in it, Frank. They're not moving into it.
No, we're in it. Yeah. Alan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, it's based around the white paper. And when I was reading the white paper, time and time again, I'm coming across high achieving schools, best performing schools, quality trusts. And it then coincided with the fact that there was an article in the paper about how a letter had gone out from Bridget Phillipson to those schools that got the best results for the disadvantaged children, congratulating them. And bearing in mind, I've always worked in areas of disadvantage, high levels of disadvantage. And with that, throughout my career, those schools have been identified as challenging schools, as in need of improvement. The list is endless. And I work with a lot of schools at the moment in different capacities, some as governors and things like that. So I kind of, for the very first time in my life, put in a Freedom of Information request asking for what which schools had been chosen and what the criteria were. So I got that information.
I'm not going to like this. I can feel myself not liking it.
Well, I didn't, and it's not Bridget Phillipson's fault.
No. But
my whole point about this is that this is the system that really, the more I think about it, we've never really moved away from the grammar school system. We've just created a different one, and we're actually creating more and more divide between some schools and others. So I wish I'd thought it through more, because when I got the Freedom of Information data, which they kindly supplied, I asked for a list of schools. They gave me a list of schools. I could have done with saying, can you give me the list of schools with their URN, with their local authority, with some other information that goes with it. But fortunately, you can download all the attainment data from the government website, and I've got the IT skills to be able to match the two. So I managed to do that. So really, that's what I was kind of looking at. What is the definition of high performing? And when you look at that, there's two ways that you could look at it. You could look at bear in mind, we've got no progress data because of COVID. So you could say, right, what are the top 25% of schools for attainment aid for disadvantaged children? Now, that's what they actually did. And therefore, if you've got a score of 41.1 or more, you got a letter and a pat on the back. If you got less than that, you didn't get anything. Now, the interesting thing about those schools is that some of those schools, the difference between the attainment of non-disadvantaged children and the disadvantaged children, some of them have a difference of 2 or 3. Some of them have got a difference of 22 or 23, and they're getting a pat on the back. And that didn't seem to be fair to me. So you could look at it, you could look at the difference between the attainment of the two groups and award give a letter and congratulations to those schools. Now, the argument would be that some of those may just have low attainment. But I'm not suggesting that I prefer one over the other. What I'm saying is it's a more complicated situation. And I go back to things like Excellence in Cities, which was a great idea. But actually what happened is they identified the high-performing schools. They got all the finances. They were the gatekeeper to all of the things. They decided what needed to be done. They got the extra staff. They got the extra support. And everybody else was left picking up the pieces. So the other thing that I looked at then was the
This is getting worse. This is getting me agitated to a point.
It is. I mean, it's quite a piece of work, so I won't bore you for too long. But I then looked at the numbers of children in the Year 11 cohort of the schools that got a pat on the back.
Yeah.
And so it's just Year 11, not in the whole school, because I think that matters as well. Because, you know, you can't deal with Year 11 in isolation. You've got hundreds of other kids. So there's everything from 185 disadvantaged children in the year group to 6. And that made my blood boil, because I've worked in those schools where you've got 185 in the year group of significant disadvantage. And actually, some of those schools are not getting a pat on the back.
No. Well, you don't know, but Stan knows that on Friday I did Stan was away, but we did a Frank and Stan chat with Rebecca Hansen, who was looking at basically the problems around Attainment 8. Now, Rebecca's a maths teacher. She works on supply in Liverpool and other areas. So she's currently teaching today, you know, probably lower set somewhere in, I don't know, Speak or somewhere. But actually, all of these sort of issues that you're talking about are in that presentation, where she was looking, also linking that then to inspection. So what she's done is she's looked at the Attainment 8 scores and then said, well, what grade did they get?
Yeah.
And there's massive crossover, you know, so just picking up on the point, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but, you know, there are some schools that have got, you know, significantly lower Attainment 8, which is really the only measure they've got at the moment, you know, and have been awarded a low grade against a school, you know, really, which has got similar sort of scoring or results to another school and have got a significantly higher grade. You know, the government need to, I mean, I agree it's not Bridget Phillipson. This is some, you know, I don't even know if it's a SPAD that's doing this, but somebody somewhere needs to get a handle on this, because, you know, I feel frustrated now that I'm reading in various things on social media, this school got a great result from its Ofsted, or its results are the best in the country because they had a letter from the Secretary of State. All we're doing is reinforcing, aren't we? That's encouraging schools not to cooperate, not to collaborate with each other. The fact that it sort of encourages schools to say, oh, well, we're top dog. You know, why would we want to help the school down the road that didn't get a letter?
Yeah, and I mean, apart from the fact that those schools who do very well through the system and get all the plaudits, those schools that are working incredibly hard in very, very difficult circumstances, it just feels like a slap in the face.
Yeah, I agree entirely.
And I distance myself from some of this, having received a letter from Chris Woodhead in the past, and his list of top performing schools against similar schools. It said, though, it was that was against similar schools.
Well,
when we had contextual
I won't publish it, but I'd love to see that FOI, what you got back. It'd be really interesting, you know. Anyway, Anthony, what's caught your eye this week?
My eye has been drawn to the idea of inclusion hubs that's raised in the white paper. And I just think, I have to say, you know, the white paper is a massive leap in the right direction. I do believe that. I think it's saying lots of things that definitely Alan and I have argued in our book. But I have to say, an inclusion hub, it feels like a bit of an oxymoron, if I'm honest.
Yes.
You know, we talk about relational inclusion, and there's a couple of things, really. I mean, one is, I don't know a school in the country, especially a secondary school and most primaries, that don't have some sort of inclusion room. You know, I have an issue with, I mean, to be honest, those rooms are brilliant. Normally, they're the best room in the school. They're often the least thought about room in the school. So it's the last room left and it's under a staircase somewhere. And I've seen people do wonderful things with broom cupboards. But that in essence isn't, that's not inclusion, surely. You know, and the other point for me is, an inclusion hub actually suggests separation, because we're going to take all these children and put them there. And Alan and I have been discussing quite at length that, it's like a one-way door. You get put in there and then there's no way out again. And I don't know a human being in the country that doesn't need a space sometimes that's somewhere else, you know, another space. But it's that integration of how do we make everybody feel part of the same school? And I just worry that an inclusion hub, the idea of it's totally misunderstanding the concept.
Mm.
Yeah.
I do think, I mean, I've said this before, I do think primary schools particularly are really struggling with children with massively complex needs, and the school's just not set up for it. And you know, whatever people might offer them doesn't solve the problems of a child who cannot be with other children because they attack them, because they attack the staff, because and you know, what does the school do? Because they're left with no real support.
Yeah, it's
I think
interesting.
that, you know, there's a number of schools when we've talked with the senior leaders around the schools I work with have raised that as a real issue, and they come up with the solution of, you know, well, we'll create a hive, we'll create what we call this, and these children will at some point in the day will be with their peers, but for a lot of the day won't be. And I'm not sure that's
I
what the
mean,
answer is.
yeah, I mean, I separate two things there. I think what we've got developing and what they now call resource bases, which in essence are on-site specialist provisions.
Yeah,
I'm not reading that as an inclusion hub. I'm talking about those children that can cope some of the time, but just not. You know, it's
Yeah.
not those kind of high needs. I think that's almost a different argument. It's this
yeah.
idea, especially for the work we've done with these dysregulated children, with children who've got trauma and attachment issues, and the idea of let's put them in a pen somewhere because
Mm.
we don't want to deal with them in the main body of the school. And I think there's two different arguments going
Yeah,
on there, but I
I do,
wouldn't
and I
agree
think
with you
it's
there.
I think what's happened in the last 3 or 4 years is there's been far more intake into mainstream schools of children with far more complex needs than they've ever had to deal with before, and I think people are holding their hands up and saying, what do we do? And I'm not sure there's the answers there anywhere.
The government announced, or somebody worked out that there was £14,000 per primary school going into this sort of initiative in terms of resource. But actually, it's reminding me of a project I supported in Blackpool, where we had very, very high levels of it was just high levels of exclusion, to be honest. We had sort of if you had world breaking figures, we were world leaders in the town. 8 secondary schools, not all of them excluding, but some of them were excluding excessively. And so the only way we felt we could actually get something back on this was to actually, not call it out, but actually just say, just put it in, get all those head teachers, those chair of governors together and just share that data. And that led to the council investing about £800,000. So that's £100,000 per secondary school, just to try and support this sort of the mechanisms that were being used in the school to support these children. These are not ones that were going to be likely to be excluded. These were not violent children. These were just children that needed a sort of a resting place, or some chance to chat to somebody who knew them well. And so what was really weird, we didn't lead on how that provision should look, but they all created primary classrooms. Every one of them. After that year, when the money dried up, none of those classrooms remained. It was all driven by, we've got the money, this is what we're going to do with it. The project didn't run long enough for us to know whether it worked or not. Right, my one, just to finish it off. Hey, I was looking, it's the World Cup coming up, isn't it? In America. I, for one, even if somebody gave me a ticket, wouldn't go. I was looking at, somebody said that the football kit, the England football kit, an adult shirt is £104.99. And for older children, a shirt and shorts is £122.99. And an infant kit, which has got the socks, £65. So that made me think about school uniform. And you know, I've not been a parent for a while. I've got grandchildren. One of them's in secondary, one's in primary. The primary, you can get the kit all from Tesco's or Marks and Spencer's. But in secondary, you've got to have the blazer with the badge. And I know the government's done a lot to try and reduce this, but I just thought, what would it be like if I was sending a child off to our local secondary school? What would we be expected to pay? So I went to the local supplier. There are other suppliers, but they're all a lot further away. This is about half a mile from the school. So it has things like compulsory, essential, and optional. So a jumper is optional. Now, I don't know what climate they live in, but actually most, you know, and but anyway, the blazer, £54, and that is the cheapest. I haven't gone for the year 11 size, you know, the 38 chest sort of stuff. Trousers 14, tie £14.50. That's compulsory. Now this is what does my head in with PE. PE shirt compulsory, £22. PE shorts compulsory, £17.50. A PE girls zip top, £30.50 compulsory. PE socks, £5 compulsory. So there's more compulsory on it than there are essentials or optional. If looking at, you went down to the local supplier, you'd be paying £237.50 per child to send to a secondary school. And then they need Astro shoes for the Astro Surface. That's another 40. So really, you're rid of 300 quid really at the end of the day for sending your child to the local secondary school. And we're talking about inclusion.
Mm.
What?
Frank, I think the local co-op high school near us has just bought uniform for the whole of year 7, I think.
I know. Well, that, you know, if you want the kids to wear that, and but I went to M&S, so bearing in mind, all you really need is, in my view, a blazer, some black trousers, a shirt, a jumper, and to be honest, PE kit. I mean, what is that all about? I mean, what, you know, I don't know about you, but when I was a primary head, we used to throw the football kits to the footballers, collect them afterwards and wash them and bring them out the next day. You know, I mean, kids just turned up in their kit, you know, for sports afternoon. So, you know, a badge would cost you between £1 and £5 that could be sewn on a blazer that cost £22 at Marks and Spencer's. You know, we are completely somewhere else, I think, in terms of poverty and what we're doing as a nation with regard to schools and the expectations. And I wonder why a parent might choose not to send their child to a school where it's going to cost them 300 quid to kit the kids out, and might want to send them to a school nearby where it will cost them 50.
Can I throw in as well that,
Yeah,
you know,
this is a chat here. You just get on, mate.
some of the schools, you know, I've seen now, because I personally, I don't wear a tie anymore. I haven't worn a tie since I took on the pro. I think the idea of ties are nonsense. And if I'm honest, I think blazers are nonsense. And there's been a lot of, if we're talking about inclusion and we know about sensory needs, there's some clothes now that are designed purposely that are comfortable for, and we've all sat there in those scratchy tops, haven't we? So
Yes.
it's probably time to overhaul. I went to a school where there was no school uniform. I'm not necessarily saying that, but I think going back to black trousers and a polo shirt and a jumper at a reasonable price seems a sensible option now, and it seems more fitting with the world we live in, surely.
Well,
I think I came from the other point of view. The school, primary school, by all means, but it had a uniform that wasn't compulsory. So what I had when it started was children who were less well off in uniform, and children who were from better off families in the latest designer stuff. So when I introduced uniform to say we're all going to have the uniform, it actually hit those better off families, because suddenly, well, they were all happy about it, to be honest.
yeah.
But it just killed that. Look at me, I've got my new Nike top on, and you've got that scruffy green uniform, you know. So I think there's an element of both ways, but you've got to make it affordable, and it's really easy to make it affordable. You know, as you say, Frank, what's compulsory? If you just we had sweatshirts because they lasted forever, and a sweatshirt with a badge on wasn't that expensive. But if you didn't want that, you could just have a sweatshirt from Marks and
Yeah,
Spencers
yeah.
or from Asda.
I think one of the things that we shouldn't lose sight of is there has been a recent change, so I acknowledge that. But up until recently, the threshold for free school meals was £7,400
Yes.
income. We need to be doing more as a society to tackle poverty, because
Absolutely.
you know, there is a lot more that we can be doing, and people are leading very, very difficult lives at the moment, and I think we don't acknowledge that and the difficulties that brings.
Yeah, and I welcome the fact that people share blazers and whatever, but actually in some respects I'm thinking, well, what are we saying here? That so you haven't really got the money, so you can have somebody else's cast off.
Mm.
Whereas everybody that can afford it, you just go down
Yeah.
to the road and buy a brand new one.
No, Frank, no, it depends how well they're done. I'll argue this because my grandson is in a second-hand uniform, if you like,
All right.
because the school really looks after their second-hand stuff,
Yes.
and you can go and choose something that's almost new and paying very little for it.
Yeah.
And we should be
So
recycling these.
Yeah, we
yeah,
should.
it
Yeah.
makes sense to do that. And I know what you mean. You might not want to be the parent, who's rooting through the lost and found and trying to find somebody's old uniform. But where schools do it well, it's not like that at all. It's like going to a shop and finding the right size, because the quality of them, they're really looked after
Yeah. I
by
probably
the
shouldn't have said
PTA.
that. I accept I probably said something wrong there.
No, it's not wrong. I
It was
think some
ill
schools.
considered because it's been shot down in flames very quickly,
Oh,
quite
Frank, there'll be
rightly.
some schools where that happens.
Yeah.
Anyway, we call it vintage now.
Yeah. True. Right. Well, interesting. Would love to have you back though when when the two books get done, actually in print. Yeah. So it'd be great. I mean, I find these chats with you two very, very easy, very chilled. You know what I mean? So I hope colleagues who've listened and watched the video feel the same. But a really broad range of issues were spoken today. The three of us, Anthony, Alan, and myself, very much on I think really on I don't like the term disadvantage. You know what I mean? It is about poverty.
Yeah, that's
It is about
Frank. Whenever anybody looks into why some schools aren't performing as well and everything, it stops at the children coming into school. It doesn't say, well, let's look at the community. Let's have a look at the average income in that community. Let's have a look, and then we've got the absolute nonsense of people working full time and still needing a supplement from the government to get them out of poverty.
Yeah.
So the government are supplementing wages from massive companies that are making huge profit.
Yeah.
It's all back to front.
Absolutely.
Last time we met, Stan introduced us to Cliff Lansley. So I just wanted to mention there's something really exciting, looks like it might be happening there. So I suppose for people listening, Cliff Lansley does a lot of work on emotional intelligence, which is becoming quite an interesting topic at the moment. And we're working on a pilot now to put emotional intelligence with relational inclusion and start using that with leadership teams and teachers and with children. So that's another watch this space, and maybe we'll come back and pick that one up and bring it with us or something. So
Love to.
Thank you, Stan, for that introduction.
It's all right. Cliff's a governor at the school where I'm a governor, so I'll be meeting him. There's a governor's meeting tonight. So I'll pass that on.
Right, well, I'm going to bring it to a close. Thank you both, gents. We'll no doubt see you again. And have a good week, everybody. Head up, keep going. We're Easter is literally just around the corner. So this is our last one before the break. So we'll be back in mid-April. So until then, cheerio. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.